Welcome to the American Amnion Association Podcast, a show dedicated to exploring the groundbreaking advancements in birth tissue-derived medical technologies, the power of collaboration, and the future of regenerative healthcare. Each episode, we bring you thought leaders, industry pioneers, and medical experts who are shaping the next frontier of healing and patient care. Today, I'm honored to have with us Jerry Pascucci, board chair of the American Amnion Association and a seasoned leader in the medtech industry. With over a decade of experience, Jerry has played a pivotal role in guiding companies through the complexities of bringing medical innovations, specifically birth tissue-derived innovations, to market, serving on the board of directors for 3 cutting-edge medtech companies, 2 of which are in the startup and early commercialization stages. He's also played a key role in bringing amniotic membrane into the surgical space, where he educates surgeons across the United States on how amniotic membrane use in surgeries can greatly improve patient outcomes. Beyond his expertise in bringing transformative medical technologies to market, Jerry is a passionate mentor and advocate for the next generation of healthcare innovators. His commitment to fostering collaboration and driving meaningful change in the medical field makes him the perfect guest for today's conversation. Jerry, welcome to the show.
Very happy to be here.
Very happy for you to be here too, and very happy that you've agreed to be our chair as well.
I think what we're doing here is that the industry needs it for sure. Very excited about it. I think it's going to be awesome for providers, health systems, and patients alike. So definitely excited about what we have coming.
Yeah. It was us speaking together about bringing this whole kind of association to life, just because there really isn't anything out there, I think, at this point in time that is just a repository for information, really pushing for not only the innovations and things of that nature that birth tissue-derived products, amnion, brings into the medical field, but also regulatory compliance, that kind of thing. And so I really appreciate your collaboration with this whole association and you agreeing to be on board.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thrilled. I think amnion and birth tissue products in general, there's so many different ways you can look at them, the good, the bad, the indifferent. And I think it's super important for us to have some kind of resource where the focus is on the good, because the products themselves can have monumental impact on patients across many different specialties, both surgical and non-surgical. And I think there's comparable devices that have been brought to market over the past couple decades to where we're at with it, where it is still very new from a regulatory perspective. I think the government's a little bit confused on how to classify it, and really, I don't know that anyone necessarily has a true fundamental understanding of how exactly the products work, but they do work. They have an absolutely incredible impact on patients across, again, surgical and clinical specialties, from wound care to stuff that some companies are doing in the general surgical space. And yeah, I think this resource just in general will be incredibly helpful as the birth tissue market continues to expand.
It's awesome and a great segue into your kind of experience. You've been in the medtech field for over a decade now, and I'm wondering how you were introduced into just amnion in general and how it's being used. 10 years ago compared to today. Can you give us a little bit of that journey?
Yeah, for sure. I think my first exposure with amnion was actually as an orthopedic trauma rep. So I've transitioned my career from, sales representation to sales leadership to now doing a little bit of everything on the executive side of things. But my first introduction, the first time I ever used it was actually in orthopedic trauma applications, using it to augment nerve repair and also to serve as a tissue barrier for orthopedic implants, the plates and the screws. But back then, the company that I was with really didn't have much education around it. I think there were a couple surgeons that identified some of the benefits that I could provide in that type of setting, but really it wasn't my focus. I was focused on moving metal and selling plates and screws for trauma applications. Comparatively today, amnion makes up 95% of every day of my life now. And I think that dramatic shift has really occurred because of how many clinical advantages and clinical outcome improvements can be correlated with and connected to amniotic tissue. So today we use it for everything from chronic non-healing wounds to ocular abrasions. And really our focus and my focus is on general surgical applications of amniotic tissue and its benefits in different surgical specialties like colorectal surgery, GYN, urology, and thoracic. And I think what we're realizing as organizations are the more and more cases we do, the more and more patients that receive these types of products, the more and more incredible outcomes we are recognizing and realizing as a result of these products being used.
That's incredible. And as you touched on, it's been used in kind of the wound care for healing component, that kind of thing, for many years. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, I think the first use that I recognize of amniotic tissue was back in 1915 for actually an ocular injury. It's my understanding it was more of a chemical burn to the cheek, eye region. And that's the basis of use that I understand it to be, right? Wound care treatments all the way back to the early 1900s. I think nowadays, the wound care space, in particular, the chronic non healing wound space, probably consumes more amniotic tissue than any other specialty combined. And yeah, we've got years and years of documented success with chronic non-healing wounds, right? Taking these patients that have many other associated comorbidities with really bad disease. And really the only thing that's changing during treatment is the use of these advanced treatment modalities like amniotic tissues and some other placental tissues. And we're seeing wound closure, right? However, I think on the wound care side of things, and at some point there is going to need to be a divide. And I think the American Amnion Association could be a pinnacle thought leader in helping reform. But at some point there has to be reform of amniotic tissue in the wound care space, which is incredibly different than how it's being used in the surgical space. But just from a documented success perspective, we treat a lot of wound patients on a monthly basis, dealing with diabetic injuries, dealing with pressure injuries, dealing with venous leg injuries. And we've seen amniotic tissue time and time again heal these wounds when no other treatment modality was able to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's unfortunate. And again, to your point, as far as just the regulatory things that we obviously do need regulatory compliance, things of that nature with that. But I've always thought that it was a bit unfortunate that using these amniotic grafts, especially in this wound care, the diabetic, ulcers, wounds, that kind of thing, that a lot of people are just about ready to have an amputation or lose digits and things of that nature. And that this often is the last like ditch effort of treatment. And to your point, as far as, hey, you're seeing things that nothing else worked on these just crazy wounds. And then all of a sudden, oh, okay, we're going to do some amniotic patch treatment and then it heals. And so I think it's very unfortunate. That's not the kind of first treatment that you would at least do if somebody was risking losing a limb or a digit.
Yeah, no, the limb salvage, limb sparing aspect to amniotic tissue is definitely prevalent in what we see on the wound care side of things. I think the really complicated, super complicated space to address where you're heading with that. I think CMS, the FDA, I think really where it gets complicated right out of the gate is how these types of products are classified in the eyes of the FDA and how CMS looks at them. There's obviously a huge debate on reimbursements associated with these products and how that reimbursement's defined and established. And a lot of that, obviously, it's an uncomfortable topic, right? It's hard for
Right.
us to talk about, but
It is.
at some point, there's going to need to be. And I think what needs to happen is amniotic tissue needs true level one controlled evidence out there, right? Everybody that sells amnion, everybody that uses amnion, everybody that sees through the trickle down effect of what amnion can do for patients believes that amnion is a phenomenal treatment modality. I don't know. I think to make it that primary treatment mechanism, there might be a pathway there through clinical evidence, through randomized research, looking at amnion and the impacts that it has. I do think that in a pretty swift time frame, you can shift the patient's care to amniotic tissue in the event that all else is failing. And in those scenarios, obviously, it's incredible at the patient level and from a healing perspective, what we can accomplish for those patients. But there's still a lot up in the air. And I think that makes it difficult both on the provider level, along with the industry level, to really understand what the FDA and what CMS is looking for in order to prove out in their eyes what we already know is truth associated with amniotic tissue.
No, that's a great answer. And please never ever, if I'm saying something incorrectly or if I'm way off base, please feel free to correct me because this is not my expertise. This is your expertise. And this is why, well, obviously, why we wanted you to be chair, but also why we wanted you to be on the podcast as well, because you speak very intelligently and your way as far as where things are going or where things should go or where things shouldn't go. So
Yeah.
please, yeah, just
And I think honestly,
always.
like what I just said, that'll probably, I'm thinking about it, it probably rubs some people in industry the wrong way, probably rubs some people in industry the right way. But I think with where we're at with amniotic tissue, we all have to be transparent with understanding what the good and the bad and considering all factors, right? When we're talking about the amniotic tissue debate, it's not just a debate of does this work? Because I think everybody associated with it, everyone that's seen any patient from start to finish believes that amniotic tissue has some kind of clinical benefit, right? But there are so many different aspects of this. It's a $2 billion industry currently just in the chronic non-healing wound space. That is a ton of money being spent on these types of devices. And I think it's super critical. I do think it's important that physicians aren't just putting this down on every single patient without trying other traditional wound care treatments that might work, that might circumvent the needs for an expensive product to be used in every clinical application. But I definitely think we as an industry we need to be cognizant to any potential reform, and we need to lead as an industry by providing that evidence. I think the more evidence that we could provide as far as what the products are doing, right? Because no one can really answer that question currently. What is amnion doing at a cellular level, at a very basic level? We can't answer that question right now, but I think we need to be able to answer that. And I think products that do come to market that we see these great clinical results from, let's understand from a circumferential approach, is that working in every scenario? Should this be the primary treatment mechanism? Because I think there's an argument to be made that it should be the primary treatment mechanism. Should this be used? It's currently classified as an advanced treatment modality after all else fails. But I think unlike the 510(k) device, unlike other de novo classified devices, the pathway for tissue products to be brought to market is very different. And I think some reform is going to happen there. Um,
And tell me why it's different.
yeah, the way that, at least as of today, I understand all amniotic tissue products that are on market or brought to market in a different pathway than a traditional medical device, right? Most people that have an understanding of medical device understand there's a 510(k) pathway, there's a PMA pathway, there's a bunch of different classified pathways to bring a brand new product to market. You got to prove a bunch of safety and biocompatibility, and you really have to make a case in the eyes of the FDA why your product's safe and effective for whatever the intended use of that product is, right? With tissue-based products, products are brought to market in a much less scrutinized means where the FDA kind of recognizes that human tissue products can be considered safe and effective so long as they're used for same or similar function as they were in the donor that the product's coming from, right? In the space of amniotic tissue, it's really indicated as an adhesion barrier and as a wound barrier. And if you look at what the placental membrane does as a whole, that makes a lot of sense. One aspect, the placental membrane protects mom, the other protects baby, and the one that protects baby is also supplying a lot of key nutrients to baby in order for that fetus to develop into a full-blown baby. So looking at it through that lens, there's a lot that amniotic tissue does that is very comparable to what the placental matrix as a whole does inside mom during that fetal development. But because we can make that argument, because that argument can be made, bringing an amniotic membrane to market is much less scrutinized and involves much less money, and it doesn't really require much clinical data. And I think that's going to be the biggest shift that we see from a reform perspective, from a FDA oversight perspective. I think companies are going to have to start proving out the clinical benefits of their product. I think they're going to have to start developing research. There's two sides to that coin. Obviously, that's going to cost a lot more money. It's probably going to bring down the total number of manufacturers in the space, the total number of suppliers of this tissue to the space. But on the other hand, the products that we're going to be left with, they're proven, they're safe, they're effective. There's probably going to be a little bit of differentiation between the products, whereas right now, I don't know that we can make too much of that case. So I think there's a lot of good and some bad associated with that level of reform. But I think if we can get to that space, amnion can be recognized as a safe and effective product on a national landscape where it has more defined indications for use, and probably expands the total number of patients that are eligible to receive this product.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. That was very succinct and very clear. So I appreciate that. So we were talking about wound care application, and you really have been instrumental in bringing amnion into kind of the surgical space, in regard to educating surgeons across the United States and working with some very high level surgeons that are using the patches in very different ways from a surgical perspective. Can you give us a little bit of background on that?
For sure. Yeah. And I think before I get into anything, I just want to make the note that our surgeons decide to use amniotic membrane in an off label modality, meaning we're not out there as companies marketing the product for specific procedures. We're not out there marketing saying, hey, look, doc, our amniotic membrane, it's indicated for use for this specific procedure. I think that goes back to reform. That goes back to clinical justification with research. So I just want to throw that caveat out there that
Sure.
everything that we're about to talk about is off-label use as defined by a physician. Physicians are allowed to do this. They do it every day with different types of medical devices, different pharmaceuticals, and different tissue products. But I think the argument for amnion to be used in a surgical setting goes back right to what we were just talking about in the wound care
Right.
space, right? We've seen time and time again, tens of thousands of patients that this amniotic membrane in an open chronic non-healing setting really works with healing. So why wouldn't you take that same idea and apply it to some of the more difficult and tricky surgical procedures that might have incidents of adverse outcomes, and those adverse outcomes may occur at no cause of the doctor at all. Something in that light is looking at colorectal surgery with irradiated colons that require some kind of resection. And by utilizing an amniotic membrane, and there's some evidence out there to show that we're able to reduce anastomotic leaks. So think about tubing, plumbing, right? Where you have a tube, there's some damage in some portion of that tube. You separate it, you reattach it back together, and around where that gets reattached, where that tubing, that piping's reattached, there's a chance that's going to leak, and that can cause a whole plethora of not just patient-centric issues from sepsis and infection, but also to health, systemic financial damage as far as reoperative costs, ICU stay increases, the financial cost of dealing with a leak patient versus a non-leak patient. And I think we're taking that same scope, getting this product into the hands of surgeons that have never experienced or have had very little experience with human-based tissue products. and saying, "Hey, doc, what are you seeing in your specialty from a poor healing perspective or from a catastrophic failure perspective of your specific procedures that you think something that's been proven safe and effective as an adhesion barrier and as a wound barrier might aid?" And letting those doctors have those conversations back with us and having it be this open dialogue back and forth. And we've seen a ton of success with that really across 4 key specialties. I think we're now venturing into a fifth, but colorectal, urology, GYN, thoracic, and cardiothoracic surgery. And these are all surgeons coming to us, or we're going out making introductions. Adhesions are a massive problem as it relates to a wide variety of surgical procedures. So we're going out having these conversations about adhesion prevention. And quickly, that doctor, after understanding what amniotic membrane can do, is holy cow, what if I use it for this indication or that indication? And been able to collect some really cool data that we're now taking and trying to transform into level 1 randomized control multi-center clinical trial.
And that's super, super exciting. Yeah, yeah. And on that note, what have been some of the maybe unexpected obstacles and also just the wins in being one of the first companies that are really moving forward with a study of this nature? Can you talk just a little bit about that? Nothing about the study per se, but just in your opinion, how maybe things, what you liked, what you're seeing that you like, and what you're seeing that maybe perhaps, wow, what you were talking about before with the reform, just your overall kind of thoughts about moving through this whole, just the whole regulation kind of approval method. That's a big
Yeah.
mouthful. Sorry.
No, yeah, what a question. It's been a huge learning experience, I think, for everybody involved. Um, I think some of the challenges that we faced, and I'm happy you made the point that you did. We're a company very focused in those key surgical specialties. Most membrane companies, most amnion companies, most tissue-based companies in general, they're either focused on being Me Too products, and I don't mean that in any derogatory way, but
Sure.
producing the same type of bone graft and tendons and
Biologics is biologics. Yeah,
right.
yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah. Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
and many of the amnion companies, the vast majority of the amnion companies are focused really on that wound care space. So I think the way that we engineer our product definitely sets us apart and allows us to play in that surgical marketplace differently. And I don't think that companies without the technology that we pump into our amniotic membranes, I don't think they'd have the same success in the surgical specialties that we have. But I think trying to cast our net as broad as possible from a health system standpoint, we're running into the very real realization that amniotic membrane's been abused in a surgical setting as well. I think the same can be said in some scenarios with the wound care marketplace, right? There's good and bad actors and associated with every type of medical device, with every type
Sure.
of product. I think there's a whole lot more good than there are bad, but I it's become very clear that health systems have faced some level of abuse of the product, kind of surgeons dropping it into everything that they do because it's that good. The argument there is amnion might have a place in almost every surgical procedure. It's really, I think, the question more of determining which ones you absolutely need it for, which one or versus which ones you'd like to have it involved with. As far as I think the craziest thing about it is there is nothing out there. There is no predicate in any way, shape, or form. There's no historical submitted data. There's it's very much from our perspective, we are building something from the ground floor all the way up with zero assistance, zero to stand on. And we're doing that as a relatively small organization. So it's taken a lot of hours. It's taken a very creative approach to focus on what we're focused on, the pathway in a creative pathway to success in a way that we determine or deem that success. So it's been interesting. I think the FDA has been phenomenal in working closely with us to help us better understand the questions we need to be answering for them in order to support approval and indications for use. But man, it's been a great thing and it's been a bad thing. There's been many days where you're going to bed frustrated as all heck. And there have been many days where you finish up at the last call with your FDA team and you're like, holy cow, we're absolutely transforming medicine. So it's been a little bit of a whirlwind.
I bet. Yeah, I bet. And really one of the first organizations to really embark on exactly what you were talking about at the very beginning. We know what it does, but how does it do it and why? And I think that's about time that happens. And it's just interesting to me that it's not, but one of the more just smaller, but more innovative organizations that are like, okay, you know what? Let's do this. We're going to go ahead and we're going to invest the time. We're going to invest the money. We're going to invest just the research so that, and I really do believe it's going to benefit the entire industry. It's gonna fit. So that's actually really exciting to me, and I think it's selfless that a smaller organization would take this on as a project. But I think that in the overall scheme of health and patient benefits, I think it's wonderful. Yeah, wonderful what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I think it's very well rooted in our founders' initial mission for the company. And I think really from my perspective, everything and all the decisions that I make on a daily basis are very patient centric. So it's really about a company like ours finally putting patient outcomes, patient care, and true clinical evidence over profits. I think we all know that if we're successful doing what we're looking to do in this space, that the profits are going to come. But right now, we're not focused on pulling every penny out of the organization. We're not focused on being most profitable per every sale performed. Really, right now, we're focused on proving out the clinical results that we've seen across those 4 or 5 different surgical specialties and really trying to figure out, okay, which patients are going to benefit the most from this and ensuring that we bring that option to the market in a safe, effective, and compliant way with the FDA.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I will say too that it seems like the surgeons that you work with share the same uh, ethos that you do and that the company does. We had Dr. Renee Luna on the other day, and he just so happens to be our CMO for American Amnion Association, which I'm so grateful for. But yeah, I was asking him just what he's seeing, and obviously, go watch the show. Obviously, the results are insane. But I think what really makes me just it blows me away and it also just warms my heart is that DHR, the hospital that he is associated with, that they are so passionate about patient outcomes and patient care that they're willing to utilize the amnion patches and things of that nature just because of what he's showing and just the great patient outcomes that he's getting. And my hope is that more and more hospital systems around the United States will adopt that commitment and that kind of attitude to where it's, wow, okay, this isn't necessarily indicated for this. However, we are seeing these results. It's good for the patient. It's good for the hospital system in general. So therefore, we're going to adopt this, even if it's not reimbursable or just it's it's beyond belief for me. And I just think that speaks volumes of what you're doing, but also what the surgeons you're working with are doing, and that they're being champions for this as well.
Yeah, no, and Dr. Luna is incredible. I'm very happy to be able to call him a friend through everything we've done together. And DHR Health, shout out to DHR Health. I think what they're doing for their direct community is unlike anything else I see across the country. I think if you're a patient of DHR Health, you can feel very reassured that you're being treated correctly, properly. I know there's not enough good you could say about either Dr. Luna or about DHR Health. So they're incredible. But yeah, I think unfortunately, we do live in a time where private equity and venture capital has made its way into healthcare, which I think's made a lot of these conversations a little bit more cumbersome. But to your point, we can't do anything that we do without our clinicians. We've got an awesome sales team across the country, but really when push comes to shove, our success is directly correlated with the success that our providers see utilizing our product. And I think it's been really cool. I had traditionally had an orthopedic background. In the last four or so years, I've been in this space pretty exclusively. But coming from an orthopedic background where a plate's a plate, a screw, and now having this new kind of blue ocean product that really we don't have an exact grasp on exact procedures to be used. We're creating all of that with our providers, and it's been really neat just seeing the huge impact that providers are having with one or two patients and them being like, you know what, I'm a full believer, I'm bought in. What do we got to do to make this standard of care in my space? And I think that's really where across multiple specialties we're heading. We want to position our product in conjunction with our health system partners and our physician partners as a standard of care for quite a few different surgical procedures because of some of the clinical outcome improvements that we're seeing.
That's awesome. That was really going to be my last question was standard of care and where do we go from here? Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Standard of care. What a phrase. I think we're headed there. We've got a lot of really smart people, a whole lot smarter than me. We've got some really incredibly passionate people associated with what we're doing. And I'm more than confident knowing that we're going to cross that finish line in the next couple years as the standard of care and at least one specialty, if not across a couple. Yeah. Amniotic tissue, I think been around for a minute. I don't think that it's ever had the I don't think it's ever had the type of fire that it currently has, the type of voice that it currently has. And I think as we work through some of these more cumbersome questions related to reform and product classification and safety effectiveness, what's it actually doing? As we start getting all of these answers, I think the amniotic tissue market's going to transform in a hopefully a very positive way.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation and I hope that you will come back because I've got millions of other questions to ask you, but only 45 minutes in the session. But this was fantastic. And it's always great talking to you anyway. You're a wealth of knowledge on the whole just administrative side of this subject. And I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. No, this is fun. Again, super, super proud to be a part of the American Amnion Association, and I'll be back whenever you need me.
Awesome. Yep, I appreciate it. I'm Theresa Hong. I am the executive director of the American Amnion Association, and this is Jerry, and he's our chair. And you will be seeing a lot more of us. So thank you very much, and thank you for watching.